Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic for you today. Let's do it. People who live in small towns. What's the scariest thing that's ever happened while living there? Please remember to like, share, hype, listen and ask for shoutouts, and subscribe. When my friends and I were around 12 or 13, there was this bookstore downtown that we used to visit. My friend's dad worked at a restaurant a few blocks away, so we could wander around downtown while he was working. We went into the bookstore one day, and the owner started chatting with us, very friendly, but he said some kind of weird things, like he told us he had a fountain behind his store if we wanted to go swimming with him. Then he asked if we were hungry and told us he had some SpaghettiOs in the back if we wanted to come eat some. It kind of weirded us out, so we left, but since we were so young, we didn't really think much of it, other than it was weird. Then a few months later, it was on the news that he had already a young girl in his store. It's terrifying to think we ran around and hung out on that same street, or even how things could have gone differently if one of us had gone into the store alone. This didn't happen to me, but the whole story is just unnerving from beginning to end, so the details are seared into my memory. In a fairly small town in Maine, a dog groomer answers a knock at her door one morning. A strange man stands there, smelling of gasoline and pig manure, and asking her for help with a pregnant dog in distress. The pregnant dog has a pup stuck in the birth canal. The man, seemingly in an attempt to extricate the pup, has pulled the pup's head off. I'm not sure exactly when in the timeline, but the dog groomer sensed something off about this man and has her young daughter hide in a dog kennel. Sure enough, the man starts attacking the dog groomer, and she's only able to fend him off with a sliver of glass from a picture that was smashed in the struggle. At the time I read this story, the guy hadn't been caught. The specificity of the man's smell, the kid hiding in the dog kennel, and the horrible detail about the poor puppy, yikes. My hometown is about 800 in population now. It's right on the Ohio River, and everyone knows everyone. We have a place there that started calling Witch's Castle, I think in like the early 80s before I was born. It's actually just what's left of a house that burnt down, but kids made it into a scary place to go. But a group of high school girls talked a 12-year-old who they were jealous of into going there to start torturing her and then throw her in the trunk, driving around to eat with her in the trunk, stopping in a mall for a bit, and eventually burning her alive. Her name was Shanda Shearer. It was national news, and there were books about it. Some of the girls were recently released from prison, I think. I believe it happened in '92, but I was a baby. When I would tell anyone I was from Utica, Indiana, they would immediately ask me questions about it. Super sad story. People who live in places that aren't tiny and out in the woods have no idea how terrifying silence can be in the woods. I've been out numerous times where the woods have fallen silent. You can't see it, you can't hear it, you can't smell it, but you sure can feel it. It's watching you, it's following you. The hair on the back of your dog is standing straight up, and you still have a few miles before you're home. You just keep your head on a swivel, and for F's sake, you just keep moving. I live in a small town, one of those that everyone knows everyone kind of town. One night, my dad, his girlfriend, and 2 kids were over from out of state. In total, there were about 8 or 9 of us there. About 9 o'clock at night, there was a knock at the door. My brother-in-law goes to answer it, and there's a man there out of breath and speaking incoherently. We gathered that he was asking to borrow one of our cars. He wouldn't take no for an answer. Next thing I knew, my brother-in-law had pulled his pistol from the cabinet next to the door. Now I'll take a moment to say that the previous 30 minutes or so, we had all been showing my dad our weapons collection. There was a range of pistol, rifles, and shotguns. Pretty much the worst time for someone to pull this. Even though there was no ammo, except for the pistol my brother-in-law had, having 3 or 4 rifles aimed at you would be scary as shit. Anyway, the dude is persistent. We gather that some amount of drugs were in his system. He ends up putting his foot in the door, preventing it from being closed. After some crazy amount of calmness from my brother-in-law, the dude ends up leaving. We keep hearing noises outside. Apparently he kept checking our cars and even tried to start our four-wheeler, which was broken at the time. We called the cops and let them know what happened. Since we live in a small town, our city's police jurisdiction doesn't extend all the way out to where we live, and County PD responded. Luckily, they had been looking for this guy for a bit, but they were close by. It was crazy seeing 6 or 7 cop cars in our front lawn with search dogs and the lot. They leave a cop in front as the rest go out searching. An hour or so later, he leaves and we weren't sure exactly why, but we ended up calling the non-emergency number to figure out what's going on because we were all scared shitless. They found the dude about a mile or so into the forest behind our house. To add to it all, they set the house alarm that night, which is supposed to be more for when you're out of town, as there are internal motion sensors, so about 2:30 in the morning, the alarm ends up going off loud as shit. The cat set off the hallway sensor, and that was the end of that, thankfully. When I was 18, I lived in this shitty apartment building, one of only 2 in the whole town. I lived with a few of my high school friends, and we basically just got drunk and played video games when we weren't at work, all hours of the night. One night, a guy knocks on our door looking for his friend. He hadn't seen her in a week, and she lived in one of the other 20 apartments in the building. We said he had not seen her and wished him luck tracking her down. I suppose it would have helped to know this was a super small town. Everyone knew everyone. We forgot about the guy until on my lunch the next day, I walked home only to find every cop in our town in the parking lot. The missing girl from the night before had apparently been murdered a week prior, and the killer had been holding his own wife and kids hostage for days because they had found out. When the guy's wife got out of her house, she called the cops, and they found the woman's body shortly after. She had been dead in the apartment for a week, and everyone in our town lost their minds. I suppose to people in cities or larger towns this isn't that out of place. It is. But in a town that small, it was crazy. We knew the victim and her killer and their families. I think the only other murder in or near the town had been a guy shooting his girlfriend in a jealous rage maybe 20 years earlier. Urban-suburban transplant who moved to a very rural town in 2012. In the course of almost 5 years, there have been numerous CPS inquiries at the school I teach at, which seemed abnormal, having started my career in a suburban area. The most rattling instances as follows. 1. 2 years ago, 2 elementary students at a neighboring district were found locked in dog cages by their parents after a truancy investigation. 2. This year, a student I taught shot his brother in his sleep, then dragged his brother's body into a shed before stealing his brother's car and going on a joyride. He later returned home to await his mother's arrival and, without a hint of remorse or emotion, relayed what he had done to his mother. 3. This could very well be small-town rumors, but apparently my neighbors across the road have been suspected of running meth via their cattle. My guess would be smuggling by inserting bags into their anuses, if it is the case. They do only transport their cattle in the dead of night, but that may be a matter of courtesy by not congesting the road with unnecessary traffic. Needless to say, I'm ready to get back to civilization. When I was 14 to 16, I started working at a convenience store gas station. Not long after I started, this man who was a garbage man would come in almost every day. He would chit-chat every time and was always by the same thing. He was in his 30s. He would always say, "Hey, trouble," when he walked in. By the time I was 15 or 16, he was still coming every day and talking, but that the weird, awkward comments started happening, didn't really think too much of it, because it happened sometimes. But then he started asking me to dinner and stuff, which I respectfully declined, until he started asking every time he came in. I started to get a bit short with him, hoping that he would just go somewhere else. Eventually, when I went into one shift, my bosses, who were from India, pulled me aside and asked me to tell my friends to stop calling and asking when my shifts were. I immediately got uncomfortable and assured them that everyone who I'm close with wouldn't call and ask those things. Then they said it sounded like a middle-aged man on the phone, and sure enough, he admitted it was him. I was livid and asked my bosses to not give that info out to anyone who calls. Forward a few months, he ended up following me home and found out where I lived. One night, someone broke into my car and stole my book bag. Somehow, he found out and delivered the bag to my house directly and tried to make his way in. I thanked him for the bag and pretended I was on my way out. My parents weren't home from work yet. Later, I realized he's the one who took the bag. Yeah. To sum up, I eventually quit the job and started working in another town about half an hour away. Didn't see him for 2 years. I'm pretty sure a family friend that knew him had a word with him. Then he walked into the store I was working at, changed his looks completely to the point I had no idea it was him. I only realized it was him when he said, "Hey, trouble." Needless to say, I went to the back and let one of the other girls help him. Haven't seen him since. First and foremost, I just want to thank you guys all for your well wishes and words of condolences. I share them with my family, and it really does mean a lot. I'm going to be laying Chachi to rest this evening, Anyway, but as far as the stories go, if you want any shout-outs, any questions or comments, feel free to drop them below. And thank you guys for everything. I really love this community. I'll see you tomorrow. Lived in a small mountain town for a year or so. Population about 7,400 now. Was probably closer to 5,000 when I lived there. The town had a tiny AM radio station, of which I was a DJ. There were 5 employees total. Me, my boss, another DJ, and 2 salespeople. That was it. So it wasn't uncommon to be working sometimes in the middle of the day and be the only person in the station. Well, one such day, right in the middle of the week, I'm recording some ads when these 2 dudes walk in, both wearing long black trench coats. It was the middle of summer. I stop what I'm doing and come out to greet them and see what they need. Only one of them speaks to me. The other guy spent the entire time carefully looking at all the stuff we had on the walls, like he was analyzing everything. The dude who spoke to me asked me a lot of random questions about the station and me. How long has the station been here? How long have you been in radio, etc.? Nothing about what he said or any of his questions was that weird, but the way he was asking them in his tone, and while staring at me with kind of vacant, glassy-eyed gaze, was firing off all sorts of something ain't right feels in my gut. I start to walk to another part of the main office area and start to sort through papers like I'm getting ready to get back to work or something. When I walk behind the main desk, I can see out the window into the parking lot. I look out the window and can see their car. Standing outside of their car are 2 more motherfuckers in black trench coats. Both of them are just standing there and staring at the entrance to the radio station. Now I am internally freaking the fuck out. I start to get a bit curt with the guy speaking to me and let them know that if they don't need anything else, that I really need to be getting back to work. The guy creepily says something like, "Of course, we don't mean to be bothering you," while still giving me that pod person stare. They finally walk out of the door, but didn't leave right away. One of them started smoking a cigarette, and they continued to stay outside all talking and gesturing toward the building. They ended up getting in their car and driving away a few minutes after that. I tell my manager, when he gets back like 15 minutes later, we never figure out exactly who they were, but he had a guess. Apparently this town had a militant branch of Jehovah's Witnesses that operated more like a cult than your usual JW weirdness. Thing is, in such a small town, you'd think I'd have seen one of them by now. I never saw any of those four in the remaining time there. More sad than scary. My hometown in South Dakota has just over 100 people in it, and my family is rather affluent within the town. My grandma is on the town council and worked as the town's finance officer for nearly 20 years. My grandfather was the maintenance man for just as long, and my father was president of the community club for nearly 10 years before he passed. Basically, I know everyone in town. One gentleman I was always told to avoid was Joe. Sweet older man with a serious drinking problem, but sometimes I'd be out at the town park or just listening to music under the water tower when he would pop by and make small talk. Was always polite, if a little bit hard to understand. Well, the winter of my senior year, my grandma makes a comment that she hasn't seen Joe at the bar. Part of her job as finance officer was managing the town's bar in a while. I don't think much of it. As long as he has a bottle to keep him company, Joe mostly keeps to himself. About a week later, though, my grandpa was up at the water tower doing some regular maintenance when he saw Joe's jacket. And not much further into the trees on the other side of the alley from the water tower was Joe's frozen body. Turns out his old lady had been mad at him for something and chased him out of the house with a knife. He'd started to go to the bar, but given the nature of small towns, the bar closed early a lot, especially in the winter if business was really slow, and he ended up passing out in the alley, freezing to death in the process. Mostly, it was sad to know that this sweet man who'd only ever hurt his own liver died like that, alone and cold and so close to all of his neighbors, but feeling like he had nowhere to go because folks in town didn't like him. And he was so close to his house, too, that it really broke my heart. The alleyway where he was found divides Main Street from Milwaukee, where his house was. But it was also creepy, knowing that his body had sat there so close to my house, a block away, 5 houses, and that I could have just as easily been the one to find him. Plus, his old lady still lives in the house. They deemed his death an accident, but no one saw much of her after that. We only knew she was still alive because she always had her trash out on Tuesdays. I think the town has gotten worse since I left, so I doubt that this would make as much of a wave nowadays. But when I was 17, I was tried as an adult for an aggravated assault after putting my father in a wheelchair and breaking a lot of shit. Nobody thought I deserved the felony charge, which is kind of scary in its own way. In 2007, we lived in a small town in Kentucky near Fort Campbell. My now ex had just deployed to Iraq, and the kids and I, who had moved there 7 months prior, were settling into the school year. We heard through parents of their classmates who worked in the emergency room at the local hospital that a woman had been brought in who had been arred and stabbed in the neck with a butter knife in a remote area about 12 miles from where we lived, and her 5-year-old, her 14-year-old, and her 17-year-old had been murdered when they came home from school that day. The guy had slashed their throats since they had come across him attacking their mother, but he was stupid, and he had committed this crime using his work truck and in his work uniform, which was a DirecTV technician installer, so catching him wasn't difficult. The woman survived, and they actually did a TV show on her on the ID channel. The really creepy part about this was the guy actually lived in the town that I lived in, and he lived less than a mile from my house. We passed his house every single day on the way home from school, and the kicker was, he was the DirecTV installer who had installed my system. The guy had been inside my house not 7 months earlier. I live in an old house that was converted into apartments in a small, sleepy town. One morning, I was walking my dog. I was around 25 at the time, but looked young, no makeup, hair in a ponytail, etc. And a car pulled over, and the person inside asked me for directions. I kept a safe distance as I tried to describe how to get to his destination. When I finally looked down and saw he was not wearing any pants. Okay, disgusting, but not overly scary. Like 8 months later, it was a chilly January morning, like literally 5 degrees, and it was pitch dark. Again, I was walking my dog before work as I was climbing the stairs onto the porch to go back inside. The same guy steps out. He was already on the porch waiting for me, pants around his ankles, touching himself, and asking me how I'm doing. I ran inside to the foyer and slammed the door, but at that time the door did not have a lock, so he just crashed in after me. Once that happened, I thought for sure I was going to die, but I managed to run upstairs to my apartment and lock it and dial 911. I also yelled and screamed, hoping my neighbors would wake up. They didn't. The police eventually caught him, and he spent like 3 months in jail. He'd been arrested bunches of times before and after this incident. He later tried to lure a 14-year-old into his car. I think he's in jail now. I hope. The first murder in 100 years in my hometown happened in my neighborhood. Some guy got shot over drug money. Then at high school, I was robbed at knife point by some local heroin addicts. Apparently, they heard that I was selling weed and would be flush with cash. People just watched these two guys push me around, pull a knife, then grab my wallet. Nobody did shit to help me. I know they saw what went down because it was the biggest gossip at school the next day, up until the faculty heard and the police got involved. These happened in 2 neighboring towns of about 3,000 people. I grew up in a tiny Oregon town called Chiloquin. Last I checked, the population was 750. It's a reservation that is mostly populated by Native Americans. During a powwow they hold a few times a year, I was accused of hitting one of the popular Native little sisters. I didn't. I just pissed her friend off because I took a toy from her that she was hitting me with. They were both 17. B, I was one of the few whites that grew up in that town. I never thought I'd ever see a Frankenstein-type mob in real life, but I did, and they were legitimately after my ass. I was terrified. The end result was a severe ass beating that landed me in the hospital. My grandpa used to live in a small town in southern Michigan. It was a small cottage on a lake which a bunch of people shared. My family was down there for a couple of days on 4th of July until I saw the most horrific sight. People were launching fireworks on a pontoon boat in the middle of the lake, and one of them malfunctioned, thus blowing up everything on the boat. The boat immediately had a bunch of flaming bodies jumping into the lake while the boat was sinking like the Titanic. About 10 people were on it at the time, and 7 of them caught fire and escaped with second-degree burns. One of them died in the explosion, and 2 others had no injuries. The next day, you could see body parts floating down the lake or on some shore from the dead guy. His body was never found, and they pulled the boat out the next day.